Warning! Tube amplifiers have lethal voltages inside them. Please do not attempt to build, test, or repair these without understanding and following all safety protocols. Hey y'all! Well, we're back for the last segment on building our little color preamp, and I'm not going to waste any time here. Let's get busy finishing this thing up. So in the last video, we did all the wiring around this 12AU7, got all the components installed. I went back and resoldered all my stuff to make sure all my solder connections were really good, because sometimes on camera they don't get perfectly done. So we know we got good solder connections and everything now, and we want to go ahead and power this thing up with the 12AU7 and the 6CA4 rectifier tube in and see what our voltages come up to. So we're going to check the B plus here as we power this amp on. I'm going to be doing all these voltage checks with my other hand behind my back. And we'll witness here how slowly the voltage comes up with these indirectly heated rectifier tubes, which is really nice. So I set the variac earlier so that this B plus would be right at 300 volts, which is what our target is. And as you saw in the earlier video when we were checking the power supply, with it unloaded, the voltage was a lot higher than that. So now we're at 108 volts on the variac, and we're at 300 volts. Hopefully when we get the other tube online and get the current from it pulling on the power supply, we'll be right at 300 volts at wall voltage. So again, we've got 300 volts here on our B plus. Now if we look at the data sheet here, we see that the maximum voltage is 300 volts. Again, when we're checking this voltage here, it's directly hooked to the plate of the cathode follower, and you may be going, OMG, we got maximum voltage on the tube. That seems kind of scary. Well, what you have to realize is on the cathode of that tube, we've got 84 volts. So we've really only got a little over 215 volts across the tube, and that's the measurement that matters. Then if we do the math, we have an 84 volt drop across 11K of resistance, which is right around 7.5 milliamps, which is perfect for what we want to see on a cathode follower. So we're all good to go there. And I'm going to go ahead and show you the voltage here. This is on the grid of the cathode follower. We've got basically 76 volts because this is the voltage between the 1K and the 10K resistors that the 1 meg grid leak resistor is hooked up to. So that's the voltages for the cathode follower. So then we come over here, and this is the plate of the amplification triode, which is 150 volts, which is exactly half of what our B plus is, which is a really good place to be for an amplification tube, to be half of the B plus. So then we come in here and we check the cathode of this tube, and we're at 6.55 volts. Well, if you saw the earlier schematic, it said this should be 5.8 volts. Well, that was from when Matt was running this amp at 250 volts on the B plus, and later he raised it to 300, and I guess he forgot to go back, which I can understand, and change that 5.8 volts to what should be 7 volts. Now, so if you watched the last video, you saw where the guy that sent me these parts sent a 2.2K instead of a 2.4K for this cathode resistor. And I was suspecting that we would probably end up with somewhere between 5.8 and 7 volts using this, and that's exactly what happened. We've got 6.55. And so we're still perfectly in range for what this should be. I'm going to go ahead and change my schematic to this 2.2K so people aren't confused, and then update these voltages that I'm recording on the schematic to help you test this stuff. So the only thing that concerns me a little bit is this 85 volts on the cathode of the cathode follower. So if we look at the data sheet again for the 12AU7, it's showing that the maximum DC heater to cathode is 100 volts. And we're right at 85% of the rating. Normally, I like to keep the voltage between the cathode and the heater as low as possible. And again, we can't get it to zero because we've got several different voltages on the cathodes of the tubes being powered by these heaters. So in this case, we got 6.5 volts and 84 volts. So what I would normally like to do is pick a voltage between those two cathodes, let's say 45 volts, and create a voltage divider off of the B plus to then hook the heater center tap to lift the DC offset on the AC heaters to this 45 volt-ish number. The other thing we have to take into consideration is the 6CA4 rectifier tube is also being powered off these same 6.3 volt heaters. So we come over here and check the cathode of that rectifier tube. We got 323 volts. So let's look at the data sheet for the rectifier tube, and it's showing a maximum of 500. So we're well within the safety range on that tube. And by lifting the center tap of the heater up to 45 volts, we would actually make that voltage differential less, down to like 280-ish volts. And so that would just help that tube. So not a problem there if we decide to do a voltage divider. I'm going to go and turn it off since we're done measuring voltages. So if we did decide we wanted to install a voltage divider, we've got a spot over here in the corner of the amp that's not being used that we could put a 3-terminal tag strip and attach it to this as ground, and then run a ground wire from the center of this over to our star ground point. We put 2 resistors to create the voltage divider, and then you put a cap on the negative side of the voltage divider to ground. Then we would pull the 43 volts off the center of those 2 resistors by hooking the center tap for the heater to that point on the tag strip. And that would add 43 volts DC, lifting the heater up that amount. So I'm probably going to go ahead and build this amp with the center tap grounded because that's the simplest way to do it. And if the amp's quiet, probably okay just to leave it like that. But on my personal one, I'm probably going to go ahead and lift the heater up to 45 volts positive DC just as kind of a best practices thing. So anyway, I'm going to get back to working on this amp now off camera. I'm going to wire up this tube, and I'll come back and show you like how all the connections are done just for clarity, and then we can start connecting the RCA jacks, the volume controls, the little extra capacitors like the coupling caps and stuff, and get this thing ready to go test. So I got this other tube socket soldered up, and it's the duplicate of this one, just moved over here. We didn't flip it around or do anything weird. This is again our B+. We just pulled it across from this B+ terminal over here. Got one wire that connects to the plate of the cathode follower. Back behind here we've got our 51K plate load resistor for the amplification triode. Goes from this terminal to this terminal. Then we have a wire that's going from this terminal over to the plate. We've got our 5K grid stopper that goes from the grid pin to this terminal. And then we have our 510K grid leak resistor that goes from this terminal to the ground. This white wire is going from the cathode to this terminal. And then from this terminal to ground, we have our 2.2K cathode resistor. Then on this side, we've got a 1K grid stopper. It goes from the grid to this terminal here. Then we've got a 1 meg resistor that goes from here to this terminal right here that's between these two resistors. The cathode is tied with this white wire to this terminal. Got a 1K resistor. And then from here to ground we have a 10K resistor. And then we have the plate is directly connected to the B plus here. And then on the ground we connected this terminal around with this green wire to this terminal, and then ran this ground all the way back up to our star ground point over here. And then the heaters connect pins 4 and 5 on one side, pin 9 on the other. Then they wrap around, they go under this little tunnel, they come up here and over to our heaters. So now that we've got all the tubes connected, I want to power this thing up. Let me zoom out so we can see the meter here as I'm checking these voltages. So earlier I powered it up on the Variac just to make sure everything was okay and slowly brought the voltage up, but everything seems to be going great. So now we've got it plugged into the wall outlet. We're going to power this thing up and see what our voltage looks like. And again, we got our ground clip hooked up. We've got one hand behind our back while we're checking these other voltages here. And once again, you can see slowly our B plus comes up. We were targeting 300. But I'll take 307. That's close enough for me. Got 151 there. 154 there. That all looks fine. 6.76 on that cathode. 6.66 on that cathode. That both looks good. So then we come over here and measure. This one's at 87. This one's at 85. That all looks good. I can live with those voltages. If I wanted to bring the B plus down a few volts, I could raise the value of that resistor in the power supply from a 2K to a 2.1 or a 2.2, something like that. But I'm fine with it 307. That's not going to be an issue. So in the final stages of this build, and we've got some capacitors to install and possibly a decision to make here. First we have this little 50 UF 16 volt cap, and it goes right across those two terminals there. So I'll solder that guy here in a minute. Then we have this coupling cap, and it's going to go from there to there across those terminals like that. The problem I have now is how to route these output capacitors. And they have to go from this terminal to that terminal, and then from this terminal to this terminal. And I don't like there being a bunch of unshielded long lengths of wire, but the way these tubes are kind of spread out, we don't have a whole lot of choice. The guy who drilled all the holes and stuff in this board probably had a different idea for how these tubes were going to get laid out than I did. And sorry if you can hear Dolly eating, but she's hungry. She's over there chomping away. I think I want to turn the volume pot like this. In doing that, because if I don't turn it, I'm going to have to run this cap like it's actually coming from this terminal, but I kind of put this thing together as an idea. I could wrap around the back side of this resistor kind of like this, but I'm still not real crazy about that. And if I turn it this direction, then as you can see, there's barely enough room to even put the cap in, which is awesome. And then when we go in this other direction, it'll be like that. It also puts the grounds closer to where they're going to go. Because if I have it turned this direction, the ground's going to have to run all the way across and over to here. But I have like this, then this ground is a lot shorter. I could probably even just go across the top like that. And then this ground goes right to there. And then the shielded wire is going to go from here over to there, and from here over to there. And so, let me go drill this hole here, and I'm going to go ahead and get these little guys soldered in on one channel, and then come back and I'll show you soldering them and soldering the coupling cap in the other one, and like figure out how I'm going to run these other caps and stuff and get all that soldered in place and get this thing closer and closer to being done. Okay, so I got one of the tubes wired up here. Got this RCA jack, comes over to the center pin. We ground both the signal and the shield for this wire right here on this negative. Green wire comes under here, goes up, goes to this ground point. Coupling cap goes from here over to here. Then we have the other coupling cap that goes from this outboard pin up to this pin on the volume control. So let's get this other tube all wired up. First thing we come in, we got to get this ground wire like that. Then it's going to go right there. And then we've prepped these signal wires like this. And let me zoom in here and show you what this looks like. Okay, so we strip this back and we get this shielding and twist it up and then tie it to this ground wire, which is the white wire. Put a little solder on the tip of it. And then we pull this red wire over and put a little solder on the tip of it. Then on the other end, we cut the shielding back and cut it completely off. Then we put some heat shrink tubing on it to insulate the little bit of shielding that might be left there. And then we have our positive wire and our ground wire, and this is what we connect to the RCA end. So the shield's only grounded at the amplifier end of the chassis, not at the RCA jacks. Okay, so here at the volume control end, and just solder all this together. Then we'll get the positive one to go in here, like that. We'll solder the positive. And then the negative on the side. And the other thing to remember is these RCA jacks are insulated from the chassis. You do not want the body of the RCA jack touching the chassis, because that will definitely create a ground loop. So the next thing we want to do is connect this RCA jack up to this tube. This is the input. So the center pin is going to go to the grid, and this is going to go to our ground point here. Let's go ahead and get our positive first. Like that. Then we're going to come around here, solder these into this RCA jack. Here's the ground. And there's the positive. And one of the things I like about the way this is wired up is you'll notice we have the ground for the input, or the negative of the input signal comes to this ground point, then goes to the negative of the volume control, and then here is the negative or the ground side of the output jack, goes right over to here. So the grounds through the input are all in line like that. They just go from here, there, and then over to here. And that should help keep the signal nice and clean. So then the next thing we need to do is install this coupling cap. Go ahead and push that down a little bit. Give us some room here. And it's going to go just like that. Sometimes it's hard to know what order to solder this stuff. Probably should have put the ground wire in after the cap, but I think we can get in here and solder this without burning up any insulation. So next to the last thing we need to do is put this coupling cap across here. And then the last thing we have to do is solder this little bypass cap across this cathode resistor. And there we go. Got our two coupling caps, our little Mundorf 0.1 UF. Here's our 1 UF other film cap that goes from the output terminal or the cathode of the cathode follower over to this terminal on the volume control. This is what goes to the center of the RCA jack, which is the output, and then here's our ground that's connected over to this ground point over here. So the only thing we have left to do is I want to install this switch for this indicator light and figure out what kind of resistor to put across it to do our bright and dim indicator light, and we are ready to test this thing out. Well, as you can see, we've really been zipping along on this project, and this thing's all buttoned up. We're still going to wait a little while before we start testing and doing reviews and all of that on it, though. One of the things I want to wait, I've got some cosmetic items coming. I want to put some silver RCA jacks on because these gold ones don't really match anything. And honestly, I like the RCA jacks that you solder directly onto the body of the jacks. So got a set of those coming for this. I've also ordered a set of the little tube rings that I like putting around the tubes to hide this hardware. And for this amp, I got some black ones. And I think, you know, with this black fuse holder and the transformer and the power cord and this black knob, that's going to really kind of just finish it all off and get it where it's Skunky Designs approved. So it might be a few weeks before all that stuff gets here. I also want to spend some time testing and listening to this against the winner of our last preamp shootout, this one with a couple of 6S and 7 tubes. I think I used CV181 tubes in it when I was listening to it, but anyway, this thing sounds really nice. Also got this little Noob Sound E6, which is a popular little preamp that I did a video on earlier this week on how to prep the Soviet tubes to go in it, because the China ones that came in it just scream oscillating if you just get near it. So want to play more with this. I want to play more with this little FX Audio FX01. This is the one without the tone controls and no op amps in it. It's supposed to be a nice sounding little thing. I've played with it a little bit and it does seem to work well, but I want to compare it to this and this and this and this. And this is the OG simple preamp that I built that has no cathode follower, that really doesn't work well with solid state amplifiers. The other thing that I've got going on is I've got two different kinds of chip amps coming to play with some other speakers that I'm building. And right now I don't have a solid state amp to test this stuff on, and I really don't feel like testing it with tube amps does any justice to what their purpose is. I think the vast majority of users are going to be wanting to use this with some kind of, probably a little cheap $100 little Class D amp. And so I want to get some of those here, and I've kind of gotten this routine with a friend of mine on Sunday afternoons. We go over and A/B listen to different audio gear and play around with stuff. We did phono stages this past weekend, which I'm going to do a video series on the various phono stages that we listened to and critiqued. But anyway, I want to do the same thing with these preamps. So it may be a few weeks before I actually do like the final follow-up on this and testing, and I want to make sure that I'm giving y'all like legit review of what this thing is. A lot of people have built it and it's like the way it sounds, so I don't think you'll mess up building this thing. I'm also going to do a review about variations of this and what you might consider doing if you do decide to build one of these to tailor it to your system. When I did get the little indicator light, and I hope this shows up on the video, that's on low and that's on high. So you've got two different brightnesses of the indicator, which I think turned out pretty cool. And also it came with an incandescent bulb in it, and those actually draw a lot of power. And I found this little LED bulb with a bayonet that fit in this holder, which I think gives it an even cooler look. And I was able to use a 1K resistor for the dim setting. So anyway, we got all that done. Got this amp all basically finished. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this series. Like I said, I'm going to do one more video about kind of the variations on a theme, and then we'll do the final video. Please don't pester me. It might be a few weeks before we get ready to like do the final analysis of this preamp, and it'll probably be in conjunction with a shootout with some of these other preamps. So anyway, hope you're enjoying this content. If you are, please subscribe so you don't miss the future videos. Thanks to you Patreon members and people that have donated to my website financially, and also to folks that have donated gear like this great viewer, and that really helps give me stuff to make content from. So anyway, thanks again, like the video, and we'll see you soon. Have a nice day.